She stood before a room full of strangers and declared she'd rather die than date a black man, not knowing he was standing right behind her, holding the blueprints that could save her crumbling legacy. 6 months later, Sophie Vance would be on her knees, begging that same man to stay, her inheritance gone, her father's empire crashing down around her. But what she didn't know was that this humble carpenter held more than just the keys to her mother's historic mansion. He held the power to teach her what true worth really means. One cruel sentence would cost her everything she thought mattered, only to give her everything she never knew she needed. This is the story of a woman who had to lose herself completely to finally find out who she was meant to become. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. This journey is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Sophie Vance pressed her designer heel against the brake pedal as her silver Mercedes hit another pothole. The crack echoed through the quiet Maine countryside like a gunshot. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Unbelievable," she muttered. The road to Vance Manor had seen better days. Much better days. Weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt. Tree branches hung low overhead, scraping against her roof. Sophie winced at each scratch, imagining what her car would look like by the time she reached the house. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Dad calling. Again. She let it ring. The trees finally opened up, and there it was. Vance Manor sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The Victorian mansion had once been the crown jewel of coastal Maine. 3 stories of white clapboard siding, wraparound porches, and towering windows that caught the afternoon sun. Or at least, that's how Sophie remembered it. Now, as she pulled into the circular driveway, her stomach dropped. The paint was peeling in long strips. Several shutters hung crooked or were missing entirely. The front steps sagged in the middle. One of the porch columns had a visible crack running from top to bottom. Dead leaves filled the gutters and covered the porch like a blanket. Sophie turned off the engine and sat there, staring. This was worse than the photos her father had shown her. Much worse. She finally stepped out of the car, her heels crunching on the gravel. The October wind whipped her blonde hair across her face. She pushed it back and looked up at the house that had once been her mother's pride and joy. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. "What happened to your beautiful house?" The front door creaked open. A woman in her 60s stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Brenda had been the housekeeper here for 30 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her dark eyes watched Sophie with an expression that was hard to read. "Miss Sophie," Brenda said, "you made it." "Barely." Sophie climbed the steps carefully, testing each board before putting her full weight on it. "Brenda, why didn't anyone tell me it was this bad?" "Your father saw it. He chose not to fix it." Sophie reached the top of the steps and hugged the older woman briefly. Brenda smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh bread, like home, or at least what home used to be. "Let me guess," Sophie said. "He wants to sell it. To the highest bidder. Some hotel chain wants to tear it down and build condos." The words hit Sophie like a punch to the chest. Tear it down. Her mother had died 5 years ago, and this house was the last piece of her that remained. Every summer of Sophie's childhood had been spent here, running through these halls, reading on the porch, watching storms roll in from the ocean. "He can't do that," Sophie said. Brenda's expression softened slightly. "He can, and he will, unless you give him a reason not to." They walked inside, together. The entry hall was grand, with a sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. Or, It would have been grand if half the floorboards hadn't been buckled. Water stains marked the ceiling. The chandelier hung crooked, several crystals missing. Sophie's phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Hi, Dad. Did you see it?" Harrison Vance's voice was sharp, businesslike. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'm standing in it right now." "Then you understand why we need to sell." "That house is a money pit, Sophie. Your mother's little dream has become a nightmare." Sophie's jaw tightened. "Don't talk about Mom like that." "I'm being realistic. Something you've never been good at." He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Look, I'll give you 6 months. Get the place fixed up, ready for a grand opening as a boutique inn. If you can pull it off, we'll keep it. If not, I'm selling to the developers. They've already made an offer." 6 months? Dad, this place needs a year of work, minimum. 6 months, Sophie. That's all you're getting, and I'm not throwing good money after bad. You've got the budget I sent you. Make it work. The line went dead. Sophie stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, looking around at the disaster surrounding her. Make it work? With what? She'd never renovated anything in her life. She'd never even painted a room. "The bones of the house are tired," Brenda said quietly. She was standing by the fireplace, running her hand along the mantel. "But they're still good. It just needs someone who knows what they're doing." "Do you know anyone?" "There's a man in town, Elijah Moore. He does restoration work, beautiful work. He saved the old church on Maple Street, made it look like it did in 1890. Sophie pulled out her phone and typed the name into her search. A website popped up. Moore Restoration. The photos showed intricate woodwork, before and after shots of old buildings brought back to life. In the About section, there was a picture of a man in his 30s, dark-skinned, with kind eyes and strong hands, holding a chisel. "He's good," Sophie admitted. "He's the best," Brenda corrected. "And he's honest. Doesn't cut corners. Can you call him? Set up a meeting?" Brenda's expression changed. Something uncomfortable crossed her face. "I can try, but Elijah, he's particular about who he works for." Before Sophie could ask what that meant, there was a loud crack from somewhere above them. They both looked up. A piece of crown molding broke free from the ceiling and crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces. Sophie jumped back, her heart pounding. "Welcome home," Brenda said dryly. The next morning, Sophie met her friends at the Harbor View Cafe, the nicest restaurant in town. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with contractor budgets and construction timelines she didn't understand. Rachel and Jennifer were already there, sipping mimosas at a corner table. They looked exactly like they always did. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, bright smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Sophie!" Rachel stood up and air-kissed both of Sophie's cheeks. "Oh my God, you look exhausted." "Thanks," Sophie said flatly. "She means you look stressed," Jennifer corrected, though her tone suggested the same thing. "Tell us everything. Is the house really as bad as your dad said?" Sophie sank into her chair and ordered a coffee. Strong. "It's worse. The whole place is falling apart." "So sell it," Rachel said with a shrug. "Take the money and run. Your dad's offer from the developers must be huge." "It's not about the money." Sophie wrapped her hands around the coffee mug the waitress brought. "It was Mom's house." Jennifer and Rachel exchanged a look, the kind of look that said they thought Sophie was being sentimental and stupid. "Well," Jennifer said carefully, "at least you've got 6 months in this cute little town. Maybe you'll meet someone. Is there any decent dating pool here?" Rachel laughed. "In this town? Unless you want to date a lobster fisherman." "Actually," Sophie said, remembering the website from last night. Brenda told me about a contractor who might help with the house. The pictures of his work are incredible. Oh. Rachel leaned forward, interested now. Is he cute? Sophie pulled up the website on her phone and showed them Elijah's photo. Rachel's eyes widened. Oh, well, he's very handsome. Very, Jennifer agreed. There was something in her tone that made Sophie's skin prickle. Is there a problem? Sophie asked. No problem. Rachel took a long sip of her mimosa. It's just, are you sure he's qualified? I mean, for a project this important? Sophie frowned. His portfolio is amazing. He restored the old church. I'm just saying, for your family's estate, you might want someone with more traditional credentials. Jennifer smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. Someone from one of the big firms in Boston. Someone your father would approve of. Sophie felt something twist in her stomach. She knew what they were really saying. They were too polite to say it directly, but she could hear it underneath every word. And the worst part? A month ago, she might have agreed with them. He's the best in town, Sophie said firmly. Brenda recommended him? Well, if the housekeeper recommends him. Rachel's voice dripped with sarcasm. The waitress appeared with their food. As she set down the plates, Sophie caught sight of someone walking toward their table from the back of the restaurant. It was him. Elijah Moore. He was taller than she'd expected, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and a neat beard. He wore jeans and a clean flannel shirt. In his hands, he carried a roll of blueprints. Sophie's heart jumped. Brenda must have called him. He was bringing the plans. Sophie Vance? He asked. His voice was deep, calm. Yes, that's me. She started to smile. Rachel elbowed Jennifer and giggled. The sound was cruel, mocking. Sophie felt her face flush. Her friends were staring at Elijah like he was a curiosity, like he didn't belong in their space. And suddenly, Sophie wanted to prove she belonged with them, that she was still one of them, even stuck in this small town. The instinct was ugly and immediate, rising up from some dark place inside her. Please, Sophie heard herself say, her voice too loud, too bright. I'd rather die than date a black man. The words hung in the air like smoke. The entire restaurant went silent. Sophie's smile froze on her face as she realized what she'd just said. Her friends stared at her, shocked, but also excited, like she'd just told a scandalous joke, and Elijah was standing right behind her chair. She turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. His face wasn't angry. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked disappointed, tired, like he'd heard words like that before and thought maybe, just this once, things might be different. He placed the blueprints on the table very carefully. Good luck with the roof, Ms. Vance, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Every eye in the cafe watched him go. Then, slowly, they all turned to look at Sophie. She sat frozen, the weight of what she'd done crashing down on her. Rachel broke the silence with a nervous laugh. Well, that was awkward. But Sophie wasn't listening anymore. She was watching through the window as Elijah climbed into an old pickup truck and drove away. She'd just destroyed her only chance at saving her mother's house. And worse than that, much worse, she'd hurt someone who didn't deserve it. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Sophie pushed it away, feeling sick. I need to go, she said. Sophie, come on, it was just a joke. Jennifer started. But Sophie was already standing, throwing cash on the table, walking toward the door. Behind her, her friends whispered and laughed. Sophie had never felt more alone. By the time Sophie got back to the manor, A pipe had burst in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway, watching water pour from underneath the sink, flooding across the old tile floor. Brenda was trying to stop it with towels, but there were too many towels and too much water. "Where's the shut-off valve?" Sophie shouted over the sound of rushing water. "Basement, but the stairs are rotted through." Sophie kicked off her heels and ran. She found the basement door and yanked it open. The stairs did look dangerous, but she didn't have a choice. She picked her way down carefully, wincing as the old wood creaked and bent under her weight. The basement was dark and smelled like mold. She used her phone's flashlight to find the main water line and cranked the valve closed. The sound of rushing water stopped. Sophie stood there in the dark, breathing hard, her expensive dress soaked, her stockings ruined. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Girl, that was savage. Call me later." Sophie deleted it. She climbed back upstairs. Brenda had managed to soak up most of the water with towels. The older woman looked at Sophie's ruined outfit and shook her head. "You need Elijah," Brenda said simply. "He won't work for me now." "No, he won't." Brenda wrung out another towel into a bucket. "What you said at that cafe was cruel, Sophie, and stupid." "I know." Sophie's voice cracked. "I know, okay? I wanted to fit in with them. I wanted them to think I was still..." "Still what? Still better than everyone else?" Brenda's eyes were hard. "Your mother didn't raise you to talk like that." The words hit Sophie like a slap. Because Brenda was right. Her mother had been kind. She'd treated everyone with respect, from the housekeeper to the gardener to the people who delivered groceries. She would have been ashamed of what Sophie said today. Sophie sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, not caring that her dress was getting even more ruined. "What do I do?" she whispered. Brenda was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You start by calling every other contractor in the state. You'll find out real quick that Elijah Moore is the only one qualified to save this house. And then you'll have to decide what matters more, your pride or your mother's legacy." Sophie pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She started making calls. One after another, the answer was the same. Too busy, too expensive, not qualified for historical restoration. Sorry, can't help. One contractor, an older man named Bill, was more honest than the rest. "Look, Miss Vance," he said over the phone. "I heard what happened at the cafe this morning. Word travels fast in small towns. And the truth is, even if I wanted to work for you, I couldn't. That Victorian woodwork you need, the structural repairs, Elijah Moore is the only guy within 200 miles who can do that kind of work. He's an artist. The rest of us are just carpenters. Surely there's someone..." "There isn't. And even if there was, nobody's going to take a job away from Elijah. People respect him around here. He's good people." The line went dead. Sophie sat there, surrounded by wet towels and broken dreams, and realized she had completely destroyed everything. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her father. "How's the renovation going?" he asked. No greeting. "It's complicated. I'm sending an inspector in 2 weeks. If the house doesn't pass basic safety standards, I'm selling immediately. No 6 months. Do you understand?" Sophie's throat was tight. "Yes." "Good. Don't disappoint me, Sophie. You disappoint me enough as it is." He hung up. Sophie sat in the flooded kitchen as the sun began to set, painting the walls orange and gold. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to perform a miracle. And the only person who could help her was the man she'd insulted in front of the entire town. Brenda appeared in the doorway, holding a mop. "The water's cleaned up," she said. "But we've got bigger problems. The furnace just died." Of course it did. Sophie dropped her head into her hands. Through the window, she could see the ocean crashing against the cliffs. The same ocean her mother used to watch for hours, sitting on the porch with a book and a cup of tea. "I'm sorry, Mom," Sophie whispered. "I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't going to fix anything. Tomorrow, she would have to do something she'd never done before. She would have to beg. Sophie woke up the next morning to a house that felt like an icebox. She'd spent the night in her childhood bedroom, wrapped in 3 blankets and still shivering. The furnace had given up completely. Through her window, she could see gray clouds rolling in from the ocean. A storm was coming. Her phone showed 6 missed calls from her father. She ignored them all. Instead, she got dressed in the warmest clothes she'd brought, which wasn't saying much. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, and riding boots. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were red from crying. Her hair was a mess. "You can do this," she told her reflection. But her reflection didn't look convinced. Downstairs, Brenda had coffee ready. The housekeeper had somehow managed to get the old wood stove in the kitchen working, and the room was blessedly warm. "Drink this," Brenda said, handing Sophie a steaming mug. "Then go find Elijah." "What do I even say to him?" "The truth." Brenda started cracking eggs into a pan. "Tell him you were wrong. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you need help. And mean it, Sophie. Don't just say words you think he wants to hear." Sophie wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into her fingers. "What if he won't listen?" "Then you'll have to try harder." Brenda flipped the eggs with practiced ease. "Pride is a heavy thing to carry. Trust me, it'll break your back if you hold on to it too long." After breakfast, Sophie drove into town. Her GPS led her to Moore Restoration, a workshop on the edge of town near the waterfront. It was a large metal building with Moore and Son hardware, painted on the side in fading letters. Sophie parked and sat in her car for a full 5 minutes, trying to gather her courage. Through the workshop's open bay door, she could see Elijah. He was bent over a workbench, carefully sanding a piece of wood. Even from here, she could see the concentration on his face, the gentle way his hands moved across the surface. Finally, she got out of the car. The workshop smelled like sawdust and varnish. Classical music played softly from a radio in the corner. The space was immaculate. Tools hung in perfect rows, wood sorted by type and size, not a scrap of waste anywhere. Elijah didn't look up when she walked in. "We're closed," he said, his voice flat. "Please, I just need 5 minutes." "You had your chance to talk to me yesterday, at the cafe." Now he did look up, and his eyes were cold. "Said everything you needed to say, didn't you?" Sophie's throat tightened. "I came to apologize." "Okay." He went back to sanding. "You apologized. You can go now." "I need to hire you." "No." "Please, just listen." "I said no, Ms. Vance." The title sounded like an insult in his mouth. "I don't work for people who think I'm beneath them." "I don't think that." "Really?" He set down the sandpaper and turned to face her fully. "Because yesterday you told a room full of people that you'd rather die than date someone who looks like me. That sounds like you think I'm beneath you." Heat flooded Sophie's face. "I was trying to impress my friends. It was stupid and wrong, and You were trying to impress your friends?" Elijah's voice was deadly quiet. "So you decided to use me as a punchline. Use my skin color as a joke." "It wasn't. It like that." "Then what was it like, Sophie?" He crossed his arms. "Explain it to me. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you saw me as less than human. Just some black guy you could mock to make yourself feel superior." The words hit her like punches, Each one true, each one deserved. You're right, Sophie whispered. Everything you're saying is right. I was cruel. I was trying to prove I still belonged with those people, and I used you to do it. Tears were building behind her eyes, but she forced herself to keep looking at him. There's no excuse for what I said. None. And I'm so sorry. Elijah watched her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I appreciate the apology, but I'm still not working for you. The house is falling apart, Sophie said desperately. I called every contractor in the state. They all said you're the only one who can save it. Then I guess your house is going to fall apart. It was my mother's house. The words came out, broken. She died 5 years ago, and this is all I have left of her. My father wants to sell it to developers. They're going to tear it down and build condos. In 2 weeks, an inspector is coming, and if the house fails, my father gets to do whatever he wants with it. Something flickered in Elijah's expression. Just for a second. But then his face went hard again. I'm sorry about your mother, he said. Truly, but that doesn't change what you said. I know. Sophie's voice cracked. I know it doesn't, but I'm begging you anyway. Not because I deserve your help, because my mother deserves better than to have her house torn down and forgotten. Elijah turned back to his workbench. You need to leave now. Sophie stood there, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She'd failed. She'd destroyed everything with one stupid, cruel sentence, and now there was no way to fix it. She turned to go. Your mother, Elijah said quietly. What was her name? Sophie stopped. Catherine. Catherine Vance? I knew her. Elijah kept his back to Sophie, but his voice had changed, softened slightly. She used to come into my father's hardware store every summer, always asked how we were doing, always remembered everyone's names. He paused. She was kind. She was, Sophie whispered. She wouldn't have said what you said yesterday. No, she wouldn't have. Elijah was quiet for a long time. The classical music played on, something slow and sad. 2 weeks isn't enough time, he finally said. Sophie's heart jumped. So you'll... I didn't say that. He turned around, and his face was still hard. I'm thinking about it, that's all. Come back tomorrow at 6 a.m. If I decide to help you, we'll need to start early. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. His eyes met hers. If I do this, and that's a big if, things are going to be different than you're used to. I don't work for people, Sophie. I work with them. You understand? She nodded, not quite sure what he meant. Come back tomorrow, he said again. Now go. Sophie practically ran to her car, afraid he might change his mind if she stayed any longer. As she pulled away, she saw him through the window, standing at his workbench, staring down at the wood in his hands. She'd been given a chance. A small one, but still a chance. She couldn't mess this up again. Sophie barely slept that night. She kept checking her phone, half expecting a message from Elijah saying he'd changed his mind. No message came. At 5:30 the next morning, she was already awake, dressed in the most practical clothes she owned, yoga pants and a t-shirt. She pulled her hair back in a ponytail and skipped makeup entirely. When she arrived at the workshop at 5 minutes to 6, Elijah's truck was already there. The bay door was open, and light spilled out into the pre-dawn darkness. Sophie walked in, her heart hammering. Elijah was standing next to a table covered in blueprints. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. You came, he said. You told me to. I also told you 6 o'clock. It's 5:55. I didn't want to be late. Something that might have been approval crossed his face, but it vanished quickly. He gestured to the blueprints. I went to look at your house last night. Brenda let me in. He pointed to a section of the drawing. Your roof has maybe 3 months before it collapses completely. The foundation has water damage. The electrical system is a fire hazard. The plumbing is shot. And that's just what I could see in an hour. Sophie's stomach dropped. Can it be saved? Yes, but not in 2 weeks, and not with the budget your father gave you. Then what do I do? Elijah crossed his arms. We focus on the inspector. Make sure the house passes basic safety standards. That buys you the full 6 months. Then we do the real work. Okay, how much will you charge? That's the thing. He looked at her directly. I'll do it for the price your father quoted, but there's a condition. Anything. You work with me, every day, 6 in the morning until the work is done. You do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it. No complaining, no shortcuts, no calling other people to do the hard parts. You get your hands dirty, Sophie. You earn this. Sophie stared at him. You want me to be your assistant? Apprentice, laborer, whatever you want to call it. Point is, you want to save your mother's house? You're going to build it back with your own 2 hands. He leaned against the table. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Sophie thought about her manicured nails, her designer clothes, the fact that she'd never done manual labor in her entire life. Then she thought about her mother's house being torn down, turned into condos with granite countertops and no soul. I'll take it, she said. Elijah studied her face, looking for doubt. You sure? Because once we start, I'm not stopping for your discomfort. You're going to be sore. You're going to be tired. You're going to want to quit. I won't quit. We'll see. He grabbed a worn leather tool belt from a hook and held it out to her. Put this on. We start now. Sophie took the belt. It was heavy, the leather soft from years of use. She buckled it around her waist, feeling the weight of the tools pull at her hips. Elijah handed her a pair of work gloves. Let's go save your mother's house. The first day was brutal. Elijah had Sophie tearing out rotted boards from the front porch. She'd expected him to use power tools, but instead he handed her a crowbar and a hammer. We're doing this by hand? She asked. We're doing it right, he corrected. Power tools can damage the good wood. We go slow. We go careful. For 4 hours straight, Sophie pried up old boards, her muscles screaming in protest. Splinters dug into her hands despite the gloves. Sweat soaked through her shirt. Her back ached. Her shoulders burned. Elijah worked beside her, moving with steady, practiced efficiency. He didn't talk much, just occasionally corrected her grip or showed her a better angle for leverage. Around noon, Brenda brought out sandwiches and lemonade. Sophie collapsed onto the grass, her whole body trembling. How you holding up? Brenda asked, a knowing look in her eyes. Great, Sophie lied. Just great. Elijah took a long drink of lemonade. You're doing okay for a first day. It was the closest thing to praise he'd given her. Sophie felt a tiny spark of pride. After lunch, they moved inside to the electrical system. Elijah showed Sophie how to identify old knob and tube wiring, explaining why it was dangerous and how to replace it safely. You're going to need to learn this stuff, he said as they worked in the crawlspace above the first-floor ceiling. Can't fix what you don't understand. Why do I need to understand it if you're doing the work? He looked at her like she'd said something very stupid. Because this is your house, Sophie. When I'm gone, you need to know how to take care of it. Otherwise, in another 20 years, it'll be right back where we started. The thought of Elijah being gone sent an unexpected pang through Sophie's chest. Which was ridiculous, She barely knew this man, and he still clearly disliked her. By the time the sun started to set, Sophie could barely stand. Every muscle in her body hurt. She was covered in dust and grime, her clothes ruined, her hair a disaster. Elijah was packing up his tools. He looked at her, and something almost like sympathy crossed his face. "You did good today," he said. "Better than I expected." "Really?" "Really. Most people would have quit after the first hour." He shouldered his tool bag. "But we've got a long way to go. The inspector comes in 13 days. Be ready to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." "I will be." He nodded and headed for his truck. Then he paused and turned back. "Sophie?" "Yeah?" "What you said at the cafe. That kind of thinking, it's poison. It'll rot you from the inside out, just like the wood in this house." His eyes were serious. "You want to save this place? You're going to have to save yourself first." He climbed into his truck and drove away. Sophie stood in the driveway, covered in sawdust and shame, watching his taillights disappear. Brenda came out onto the porch. "Come inside. I've got dinner ready." "I need to shower first. I'm disgusting." "You're honest," Brenda corrected. "There's a difference." That night, Sophie soaked in a hot bath, her muscles slowly unknotting. She looked at her hands. The manicure she'd gotten last week was destroyed. Her nails were chipped and broken. Blisters were forming on her palms. She thought about what Elijah had said. About rot. About poison. He was right. The words she'd said at the cafe hadn't just hurt him. They'd hurt her too. They'd shown her something ugly about herself. Something she'd been pretending didn't exist. Her phone buzzed on the sink. A text from Jennifer. "Heard you're playing construction worker. That's hilarious. Call me when you're done with your little project." Sophie deleted the text. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she deleted Jennifer's contact entirely. Then Rachel's. Then everyone from that brunch. She didn't need people in her life who brought out the worst in her. She needed people who brought out the best. People like Elijah. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of hard work and harder lessons. Elijah was relentless. He had Sophie doing everything. Replacing floorboards, rewiring outlets, patching holes in the plaster walls. He taught her how to identify load-bearing beams, how to read blueprints, how to mix mortar. And slowly, despite everything, they began to develop a rhythm. Elijah started to talk more. Not a lot, but enough. He told her about growing up in this town. About how his father had owned the hardware store and taught him the trade. About how he'd met his wife, Rebecca, at church when they were teenagers. "She loved old houses," he said one afternoon as they worked on replacing windows. "She used to drag me to estate sales just to look at the architecture. Drove me crazy at the time." His voice went soft. "I miss it now." "How long has she been gone?" Sophie asked gently. 3 years. Cancer." He measured a piece of trim, his movements precise. "This manor, she always loved this place. Used to say if she won the lottery, she'd buy it and turn it into a bed and breakfast." Sophie felt a lump in her throat. "I'm sorry." "Me too." He handed her the sandpaper. "Smooth this down. Gentle strokes." On the 10th day, Sophie messed up badly. She was sanding a section of the ornate staircase banister and pressed too hard, gouging the wood. She stared at the damage, horrified. "Elijah, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." She expected him to be angry. Instead, he came over and examined the gouge calmly. "It's fixable," he said. "Watch." He showed her how to use wood filler, how to match the grain, how to sand it down until the repair was invisible. His patience surprised her. His hands were gentle as he guided hers, showing her the right pressure, the right motion. "There," he said when they were done. "Good as new." "How did you learn all this?" Sophie asked. "Practice, failure, more practice." He smiled slightly. "My father used to say that wood is forgiving if you treat it with respect. Same is true for most things in life." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Sophie felt something shift between them. Something warm and fragile and new. Then Elijah cleared his throat and stepped back. "Let's break for lunch," he said. The night before the inspection, they worked until midnight, making sure everything was perfect. The house wasn't beautiful yet, that would take months, but it was safe. Sturdy. The bones were sound. Sophie stood in the entry hall, looking around at all the work they'd done. Her work. Her own 2 hands had helped save this place. "You should be proud," Elijah said. He was packing up the last of his tools. "You worked hard." "We worked hard," Sophie corrected. He nodded. "Yeah, we did." "Elijah?" Sophie's heart was beating fast. "Thank you. For giving me a chance. For teaching me. For everything." "You earned it," he said simply. The inspector came the next day at noon. He was a thin man in his 60s with a clipboard and a suspicious expression. He went through the house room by room, testing outlets, checking for leaks, examining the structure. Elijah followed him calmly, answering every question with quiet confidence. Sophie waited in the kitchen, pacing, her stomach in knots. Finally, after 2 hours, the inspector emerged from the basement. "Well," he said, "I'll be honest. I expected this place to fail. Your father seemed pretty certain it would." Sophie's heart sank. "But," the inspector continued, looking at Elijah with something like respect, "this is some of the finest restoration work I've seen. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "We both did it," Elijah said, nodding toward Sophie. The inspector raised his eyebrows. "You did this work yourself, Ms. Vance?" Sophie held up her calloused, blistered hands. "Every bit of it." The inspector actually smiled. "Then you've earned this." He signed the bottom of his form with a flourish. "Your house passes inspection. Congratulations." After he left, Sophie and Elijah stood on the porch in silence. They'd done it. They'd saved the house. "Thank you," Sophie said again. "Stop thanking me," Elijah replied, but there was warmth in his voice now. "This is your house, your victory." "Ours," Sophie insisted. Elijah looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Yeah," he said softly. "Ours." The storm hit. On a Tuesday, 2 days after the inspection. Sophie woke to the sound of wind screaming around the manor. Rain hammered against the windows like fists. She ran to look outside and saw the ocean churning, waves as tall as buildings crashing against the cliffs. Her phone buzzed. "Elijah. Storm's bad. Stay inside. I'm coming over to board up the windows." "You don't have to do that," she texted back. "It's dangerous. The house comes first." 20 minutes later, his truck pulled into the driveway. Sophie ran out onto the porch, getting soaked instantly. "You're crazy!" she shouted over the wind. "So are you!" He was already unloading sheets of plywood from his truck bed. "If you're staying out here, make yourself useful." They worked together in the driving rain, securing plywood over the most vulnerable windows. The wind tried to rip the boards from their hands. Rain stung Sophie's face. Her clothes were plastered to her body. A gust of wind hit so hard it knocked Sophie off. Balance. She stumbled, and Elijah's arm shot out, steadying her. "Inside!" he yelled. "Now!" They'd barely made it through the door when they heard a massive crack. Through the window, they watched as one of the old oak trees near the edge of the property began to lean. Slowly, terribly, it tipped toward the house. "The roof!" Sophie screamed. "It's going to hit the new roof!" Elijah was already moving. "We have to tie it off. Rope's in my truck." "Elijah, no!" But he was already running back out into the storm. Sophie didn't think. She just followed. They reached the tree together. It was leaning at a 45-degree angle now, held up only by its roots and one other tree it had fallen against. If it came down fully, it would crush the newly repaired section of roof. Elijah threw a rope around the trunk and tossed the other end to Sophie. "Tie it to the porch column. We need to stabilize it until the storm passes." The wind was so strong, Sophie could barely stand. Rain blurred her vision. She wrapped the rope around the column once, twice, pulling it tight. Her hands were numb. Her muscles screamed. "Tighter!" Elijah shouted. She pulled with everything she had. There was a sound like a gunshot, the tree's roots giving way. "Sophie, move!" Elijah's voice cut through the storm. She looked up and saw the tree falling, saw a huge branch breaking free, saw it tumbling toward her in slow motion. Then something hit her from the side, hard. The world spun. She crashed into the muddy ground with a heavy weight on top of her. Elijah. He'd tackled her out of the way. The branch hit the ground where she'd been standing a second ago. It was the size of her car. They lay there in the mud, breathing hard. Elijah's body was pressed against hers, shielding her. She could feel his heart pounding, or maybe that was her own heart. The rain poured down on them both. "Are you okay?" he asked, his face inches from hers. Yeah, I think so." He looked at her for a moment longer, something intense in his eyes. Then he rolled off and pulled her to her feet. "Inside. For real this time." They stumbled back into the house, soaking wet and covered in mud. Elijah locked the door behind them, like he was afraid Sophie might try to run back out. The power flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "Perfect," Sophie muttered. "There's a fireplace in the library," Elijah said, "and I saw Brenda stocking firewood in there yesterday." They made their way through the dark house. Sophie's teeth were chattering. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, cold and miserable. The library was one of the few rooms they'd mostly finished. Rich wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive stone fireplace. Elijah got a fire going while Sophie found blankets in a closet. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Elijah said, not looking at her. "There's a bathroom down the hall. I'll wait here." When Sophie came back, wrapped in a thick blanket with dry clothes underneath, Elijah had the fire roaring. He'd changed too. Brenda must have left some of his spare work clothes here. His shirt was slightly too tight, and Sophie found herself noticing the way it stretched across his shoulders. "Stop it," she told herself. "He's still angry with you. He's just being professional." But when she sat down next to the fire, Elijah sat beside her. Not too close, but closer than he'd been before. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled. "You could have been killed," Elijah said quietly. "So could you. I'm used to danger on job sites. You're not." Sophie looked at him. "Why did you do it? Why did you save me?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "Because despite everything, I couldn't let you get hurt. Even though I hurt you? Even though?" Sophie felt tears building. "I don't understand you, Elijah. I said something horrible to you. I humiliated you in front of the whole town. Why don't you hate me?" "I wanted to," he admitted. "That first day, when you came to my workshop, I wanted to slam the door in your face and never think about you again." He turned to look at her. "But then I saw how hard you were willing to work, How you showed up every morning, even when your hands were bleeding from blisters. How you never complained, never asked for special treatment. He paused. And I saw you weren't the same person who said those words. Or maybe you were becoming someone different. I am different, Sophie said softly. Being here, working with you, it's changed me. You've changed me. The fire popped, sending up sparks. I've been thinking about my wife a lot lately, Elijah said. Rebecca. She used to tell me that people deserve second chances, that everyone's carrying something heavy, and sometimes that weight makes them say and do things they don't mean. He smiled sadly. I didn't always agree with her. I thought some things were unforgivable. And now I think maybe she was right. Maybe forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about giving them room to be better. Sophie's throat was tight. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, but I'm giving it to you anyway. They sat in silence, watching the fire. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the house, but inside, something had shifted. Some wall between them had crumbled. Can I ask you something? Sophie said. Sure. That day at the cafe, what were you doing there? Brenda called me, asked me to bring the blueprints for the manor. She thought maybe if you saw the plans, you'd understand how much work needed to be done. He shook his head. I should have just mailed them. I'm glad you didn't. If you had, I might never have realized what I'd become, who I'd been. Sophie pulled the blanket tighter. My friends, those women at the cafe, I've known them since college. We used to be close. Or I thought we were close. But really, we were just empty, saying cruel things to feel superior, judging everyone who wasn't like us. Why did you stay friends with them? Because I was scared of being alone. Because they made me feel like I belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was shallow and mean. She looked at Elijah. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to need people like that. What do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Sophie thought about the past 2 weeks, about learning to work with her hands, about the satisfaction of fixing something broken, about early mornings watching Elijah work, seeing the care and artistry he put into every detail. I want to be someone my mother would be proud of, she said finally. Someone who sees people for who they are, not what they look like or where they come from. Someone who builds things instead of tearing them down. Elijah nodded slowly. That's a good goal. You've helped me get there, whether you meant to or not. He smiled. Maybe you've helped me too. How? You reminded me that I can still trust people, that opening my heart again won't kill me. His voice was soft. After Rebecca died, I shut down, threw myself into work, stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends. I told myself it was easier to be alone, safer. And now? Now I'm remembering that being safe isn't the same as being alive. They looked at each other across the firelight. Sophie's heart was racing. She wanted to reach out and touch his hand, but she didn't dare. Too much. Too soon. Instead, she said, "Thank you for saving my life today. Thank you for giving me a reason to." The storm lasted through the night. Sophie and Elijah took turns keeping the fire going, dozing in armchairs, starting awake at particularly loud crashes of thunder. Around 3 a.m, Sophie woke to find Elijah standing at the window, looking out at the chaos. Can't sleep? She asked, thinking about what needs to be fixed after this is over. He didn't turn around. That tree did some damage to the fence. Probably lost some shingles. The garden is going to be a disaster. Sophie came to stand beside him. In the darkness, with only the fire behind them, she could see their reflections in the glass, standing together, almost touching. "We'll fix it," she said. "We've fixed everything else. We've still got 5 months of work ahead. The real work. Making this place beautiful again, not just functional." "I know." Sophie took a breath. "Elijah, I need to tell you something. When this is all done, when the 6 months are up and the manor is ready, I'm not going back to my old life. I'm staying here. I'm going to run this place like my mother wanted. Make it a real inn, a place people will love." He turned to look at her. "What about your father?" "What about him? He can't make me sell. The house passed inspection. I'm meeting my deadline. And even if he disowns me, even if I never get a penny of the family money, I don't care. This is what I want." Something like pride flickered across Elijah's face. "Your mother would have liked that. Did you know her well?" "Well enough. She used to come into my dad's store every summer, like I said. Always had time to talk. Asked about my school, my plans, my dreams." He smiled at the memory. "One summer, when I was about 16, I told her I wanted to restore old buildings. She said that was a noble calling. Said the world needed people who could see the beauty in broken things." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. That sounded exactly like her mother. "She was right," Elijah continued, "and she practiced what she preached. She saw beauty in this broken-down old house when everyone else just saw a money pit. She saw beauty in this town when everyone else was leaving for the cities." He paused. "She saw beauty in people, too. Didn't matter who they were. I wish I was more like her." "You're getting there." They stood at the window together, watching the storm. At some point, without either of them quite deciding to do it, their hands found each other. Elijah's palm was rough with calluses. Sophie's was softer, but marked now with the same kind of wear. They fit together perfectly. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. Sophie and Elijah walked outside to survey the damage. The fallen tree had missed the house, held back by the rope they'd tied. Branches and debris littered the yard. Part of the fence was down. Shingles were scattered across the lawn, like playing cards. But the house still stood. Strong. Solid. Safe. "Could have been worse," Elijah said. "Could have been a lot worse." Brenda emerged from the cottage where she lived on the property, looking worried. "Thank God you're both all right. I tried to come check on you, but the storm was too fierce." "We're fine," Sophie assured her. "The house is fine." "Actually," a new voice said, "I'm not so sure about that." They all turned to see a sports car pulling up the driveway. Sophie's stomach dropped. Chad. Her ex-boyfriend climbed out of the car, dressed in expensive casual wear that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of storm damage. His hair was perfect. His shoes were spotless. He looked completely out of place. "Sophie, baby, I came as soon as I heard about the storm." He walked toward her with open arms. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Chad. What are you doing here?" He finally seemed to notice Elijah. His smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you're the contractor." "Elijah Moore," Elijah said, extending his hand. Chad shook it briefly, like he was afraid he might catch something. "Right. Well, I'm sure Sophie appreciates all your work, but I'm here now. I'll take care of things from here." Sophie felt anger flash through her. "Take care of what, exactly?" "You, obviously. This is too much stress for you. Why don't you pack a bag? We'll go back to Boston for a few weeks. Let the professionals handle the repairs." "I am the professional," Sophie said coldly. "I've been doing the repairs." Chad laughed. "You? Sophie, come on. You don't know the first thing about construction." Actually, Elijah said quietly, she's been doing excellent work. She's a natural. Chad looked at Elijah like he'd spoken out of turn. That's sweet, but I'm sure Sophie is ready for a break. Aren't you, honey? He reached for Sophie's arm. She stepped back. Don't call me honey. We broke up, remember? That was just a fight. We always get back together. Not this time. Chad's expression darkened. Sophie, be reasonable. Your father is worried about you. You've been up here for weeks, playing house with... He glanced at Elijah. With strangers. It's time to come home. This is my home, Sophie said firmly. This is a construction site. It's my mother's house, and it's my home now. And if you can't respect that, you can leave. Chad stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're really going to choose this dump over me? Every single time. For a moment, Chad looked like he might argue. Then his face twisted into something ugly. Fine. Enjoy your little project? He turned to go, then stopped. Oh, and Sophie? Your father's cutting you off. He told me to tell you. No more allowance, no more credit cards. You're on your own. He got in his car and drove away, spraying gravel. Sophie stood there, her heart pounding. She'd just lost her inheritance, her trust fund, everything, and she felt free. You okay? Elijah asked softly. Yeah. Sophie started to laugh. Yeah, I'm actually great. Brenda was grinning. About time you got rid of that fool. He's been a fool for a while. I just couldn't see it. Sophie looked at the house, at the work still ahead of them. I'm going to need to get a job, aren't I? A real job. The money from opening the inn won't come for months. You already have a job, Elijah said. You're my apprentice, remember? Apprentices get paid. Elijah, I can't take your money. You've earned it, every penny. He smiled. Besides, I'm going to work you hard over the next 5 months. You'll earn every dollar. Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you. Stop thanking me, he said, but his eyes were soft. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up storm damage. And if their hands touched more than necessary while moving branches, if their eyes met and held for longer than they should, neither of them mentioned it, but both of them noticed. 3 days later, Chad sent a text. I saw you with him, the contractor. Is that what this is about? Sophie deleted it without responding. An hour later, another text. Your dad was right about you. You're throwing your life away. Delete. Then, I can't believe you'd rather be with some black guy than with me. Have you lost your mind? Sophie stared at that message for a long time. 6 weeks ago, she would have denied it, would have been horrified at the implication. Now, she just felt sad for the person she used to be. She blocked Chad's number. That evening, she was in the kitchen helping Brenda prepare dinner when Elijah came in from working on the porch. He washed his hands at the sink, and Sophie found herself watching the way water ran over his forearms, the strength in his movements. Sophie? Brenda's voice cut through her thoughts. The potatoes? Right, sorry. Sophie went back to peeling, her face hot. Brenda gave her a knowing look, but didn't say anything. They ate together at the kitchen table, Sophie, Elijah, and Brenda. It felt natural, like family. Elijah told stories about other restoration projects he'd worked on. Brenda shared gossip from town. Sophie laughed more than she had in years. After dinner, Elijah lingered. Want to see what I'm working on? He asked Sophie. Always. He led her to the ballroom, a massive space on the second floor that had been closed off for years. He'd been restoring the parquet floor, and it was almost finished. The wood glowed in the evening light. Each piece fitted perfectly to the next in an intricate pattern. It's beautiful, Sophie breathed. Wait until you see it when it's done. Your mother used to host dances here every summer. The whole town would come. He ran his hand over the smooth surface. Rebecca loved these dances. She'd make me waltz with her even though I had 2 left feet. I bet you were better than you think. I was terrible, he said with a laugh, but she didn't care. Sophie walked to the center of the room, her footsteps echoing. Will you teach me? To waltz, I mean, for when the inn opens. Elijah looked surprised. I told you, I'm not very good. I don't care. He smiled and pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found a song. Soft, classical music filled the room. Okay, basic box step. Put your hand here. He guided her hand to his shoulder. And I'll hold this one. His hand engulfed hers, warm and steady. Now, just follow my lead. They moved across the unfinished floor, stumbling at first, then finding their rhythm. Elijah counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And Sophie felt herself relaxing into the movement. You're better than you said, she told him. You're an easy partner. They turned, and suddenly they were very close. Sophie could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel his breath on her face. The music played on, but they'd stopped moving. Sophie, Elijah said, his voice rough. Yeah? I should tell you something. Her heart was hammering. Okay. I'm starting to feel things for you. Things I shouldn't feel. Things that complicate everything. Why shouldn't you feel them? Because 6 weeks ago you said you'd rather die than date someone like me. Because I'm your contractor. Because this is a mess waiting to happen. Sophie reached up and touched his face. He went very still. I was wrong, she said, softly. About everything. About you. About what matters. About who I wanted to be. She looked into his eyes. I'm falling for you, Elijah. I have been for weeks, and I don't care if it's complicated. Sophie! The sound of a car door slamming made them jump apart. They rushed to the window and looked down. Harrison Vance was here, and he didn't look happy. Sophie's father stood in the driveway like a storm cloud made flesh. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in an expensive suit that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of sawdust and work tools. Behind him, stepping out of the passenger seat, was Chad. That snake, Sophie breathed. Elijah's jaw was tight. You want me to leave? No? Sophie grabbed his hand. Stay, please. They went downstairs together. Brenda was already at the door, arms crossed, blocking Harrison's entrance like a guardian angel. Mr. Vance? She said coolly. Sophie didn't mention you were coming. I don't need an invitation to visit my own property. Harrison pushed past her into the entry hall. His eyes swept over the renovations with obvious distaste. Where's my daughter? Right here, Dad. Sophie stepped forward, still holding Elijah's hand. She saw her father's eyes drop to their joined hands, saw his face darken. Sophie, we need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Elijah and Brenda. Harrison's mouth thinned. Fine, have it your way. He gestured around the hall. I've had enough of this little fantasy. You've proved your point. You passed the inspection. Very impressive. Now it's time to be realistic. Realistic about what? About selling this house. I've got the developers waiting. They're willing to pay top dollar, even with all this. He waved dismissively at the restoration work. Amateur hour nonsense you've done. Sophie felt Elijah tense beside her, but he stayed quiet. The house isn't for sale, Sophie said firmly. It's not your decision. Actually, it is. Mom left it to me in her will. You're just the executor until I turn 30, but I have final say on whether it's sold. Harrison's eyes flashed. And how exactly do you plan to maintain it? You have no income? No trust fund anymore. Did Chad tell you? I've cut you off completely. He told me. I don't care. You will when reality sets in. This house costs a fortune to run. Insurance, property taxes, utilities, maintenance. Do you have any idea what that adds up to? I'll figure it out. By doing what? Playing contractor with your new friend here? Harrison's gaze shifted to Elijah with open contempt. Tell me, how much is he charging you for his services? I'm sure it's quite the lucrative arrangement. Elijah's hand tightened on Sophie's, but his voice was calm when he spoke. Mr. Vance, I'm charging exactly what we agreed on. The same rate I charge everyone. I'm sure you are. Harrison's tone made it clear he didn't believe that. Sophie, I need to speak with you, alone. Now. No, Dad. Elijah stays. Harrison's face went red. Fine. Then let me be blunt. This is embarrassing. For you, for the family, for everyone who knows us. Chad told me what's been going on up here. You're making a fool of yourself. What exactly did Chad tell you? That you've been spending all your time with the help. That you've developed some kind of inappropriate attachment. His name is Elijah, Sophie interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. And there's nothing inappropriate about our relationship. He's been teaching me actual skills, how to work with my hands, how to fix things, how to see value in hard work instead of just writing checks. How noble, Harrison sneered. And what happens when this little project is over? When reality crashes down? You think he's going to stick around when you can't pay him anymore? That's enough. Elijah's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stepped forward, putting himself slightly in front of Sophie. Mr. Vance, you should leave. Harrison laughed. You're telling me to leave my own property? I'm telling you to stop disrespecting your daughter, and if you can't do that, then yes, you should go. How dare you? Dad. Sophie moved to stand beside Elijah again. Elijah's right. If you're just here to insult me and the work we've done, you're not welcome. For a moment, Harrison looked genuinely shocked, like he couldn't believe his daughter was standing up to him. Then his expression hardened into something cruel. I see what this is really about now. He looked between Sophie and Elijah. My God, Sophie, you're sleeping with the hired help. That's what this is. Some kind of rebellious phase. We're not. Sophie started, her face burning. Don't lie to me. I saw the way you were looking at him upstairs. I know what's going on here. Harrison turned to Elijah. How much? How much will it take for you to walk away from my daughter and this project? Elijah's voice was cold. There isn't enough money in the world. Everyone has a price. Not me. Harrison pulled out his checkbook. 50,000. Walk away right now. Leave Sophie to come to her senses. Sophie felt sick. Dad, stop it. 100,000. Final offer. Harrison started writing. Take the money. Finish whatever work is contracted, then disappear from her life. Elijah looked at the check Harrison was holding out. For a moment, everyone in the room held their breath. Then Elijah turned to Sophie. His eyes were questioning, waiting. This was it, the moment Sophie had been dreading. Her father was forcing her to choose, to publicly claim Elijah as more than just her contractor. To defend him not as an employee, but as someone who mattered to her. 6 weeks ago, she'd hesitated. She'd called him just the contractor and broken his trust. Not this time. Elijah isn't going anywhere, Sophie said clearly. And not because I'm paying him. Because I asked him to stay. Because this house is as much his project as mine. Because... She took a breath. Because I care about him. And if you can't respect that, then you're the one who needs to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison slowly lowered the check. His face was a mixture of fury and disgust. "You've lost your mind," he said quietly. "Your mother would be ashamed." "No?" Brenda's voice cut through the tension. Catherine would be proud. Proud that Sophie finally found the courage to be herself. Proud that she's choosing love and honesty over money and status. Harrison whirled on her. "You're fired." "You can't fire me. I don't work for you. I work for this house, for Catherine's memory, and now for Sophie." "Fine, then I'll make this simple." Harrison turned back to Sophie. "You have a choice. Come home with me right now, apologize to Chad, and we'll pretend this whole disaster never happened. I'll even let you keep the house, sell it in a year for a reasonable price, and you'll get your inheritance back." "Or?" Sophie asked. "Or you stay here with him?" Harrison pointed at Elijah like he was something dirty. "And you're disowned, completely. No inheritance, no family, no safety net. You'll be on your own." Chad, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "Sophie, be smart about this. Your dad's giving you a way out." "I don't need a way out," Sophie said. "I need you all to leave." Harrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he tore up the check he'd written and let the pieces fall to the floor. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." "No," Sophie said softly. "The biggest mistake of my life was caring what you thought of me." Harrison turned on his heel and walked out. Chad lingered for a moment, looking at Sophie like he was seeing a stranger. "You really choose him over everything?" Chad asked. Sophie looked at Elijah, at his strong hands that had taught her how to build, at his patient eyes that had seen past her worst moment, at the man who had saved her life during the storm and was still standing beside her now. "Every single time," she said. Chad shook his head and followed Harrison out. The sound of their car fading down the driveway felt like freedom. Sophie stood in the entry hall, shaking. She'd just been disowned by her father, cut off from her family's money, left with nothing but a half-renovated house, and Elijah's arms wrapped around her. She collapsed into him, and suddenly she was crying. Deep, shuddering sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All the stress and fear and uncertainty of the past weeks came pouring out. "I've got you," Elijah murmured. "I've got you." Brenda quietly disappeared, leaving them alone. When Sophie finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall apart." "You just stood up to your father and chose your own path. You're allowed to fall apart." Elijah wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I'm proud of you." "Are you?" Sophie laughed weakly. "I just lost everything." "No, you just found out what really matters." "Which is what?" "This house, your mother's dream, your own two hands and what you can build with them." He paused. "And maybe, if you're interested—" "Me?" Sophie's breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I don't care about your father's money or your family name. I care about the woman who shows up at 6 every morning ready to work. The woman who learned to use a nail gun even though she was terrified. The woman who stood in a storm to save her mother's house." His eyes were intense. "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Sophie. And if that's too much, too fast, She kissed him. It was sudden and awkward and perfect. Elijah froze for half a second. Then his arms came around her and he kissed her back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophie was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for weeks. I just didn't know if you could ever forgive me for what I said." If you could ever see me as more than the woman who hurt you, I see you, Elijah said softly. All of you. The person you were, the person you're becoming, and I love both. They stood there in the entry hall, holding each other as the afternoon light streamed through the windows. So, what now? Sophie asked. I have no money. The inn won't make a profit for at least a year. I'm going to have to figure out how to survive. Now we finish the house, together, and I hire you officially, pay you a real wage for real work. Elijah? I'm serious. I've got 3 other projects lined up for the spring. I could use a partner. Someone who knows their way around a restoration project. He smiled. What do you say? Want to go into business with me? Sophie felt hope bloom in her chest. Yes. God, yes. Good, because I wasn't actually asking. He kissed her forehead. We're a team now, in work and in everything else. The next 5 months were the hardest and best of Sophie's life. She worked with Elijah every day, learning the trade from the ground up. Not just how to fix things, but why things broke in the first place. How to read a building's bones. How to respect the history while making it functional for the future. She worked on other projects too. Helped restore a Victorian house on Maple Street. Rebuilt a barn that had been damaged in a fire. Learned to use power tools, to mix concrete, to hang drywall. Her hands grew calloused and strong. Her arms developed muscles she'd never had before. She lost the softness of her old life and gained something better, confidence in her own abilities. And through it all, Elijah was there. They fell into a rhythm. Work during the day. Dinner together most nights. Long conversations about architecture and dreams in the future. Slow dancing in the ballroom while the radio played old songs. Their first official date was at a diner in town. They sat in a booth and talked until the restaurant closed, neither of them wanting the night to end. Their first argument was about paint colors for the manor's exterior. Sophie wanted bright white. Elijah insisted on historical cream. They compromised on something in between. Their first kiss in the rain happened 2 months after her father left. They were working on the roof when a sudden spring shower caught them. Elijah had laughed, and Sophie had kissed him, and they'd stayed there getting soaked until Brenda yelled at them to come inside. The town slowly warmed to Sophie. People who had heard about her comment at the cafe saw how she'd changed. Saw her working alongside Elijah, covered in paint and sawdust, treating everyone with respect. The woman at the hardware store started saving good lumber for their projects. The guy at the diner gave them free coffee on cold mornings. The church ladies invited Sophie to join their book club. She was becoming part of something, a community, a real life built on honest work and genuine relationships. And then, finally, the house was done. The grand opening was set for the first Saturday in June. Sophie stood in the entry hall the night before, looking around at everything they'd accomplished. The floors gleamed. The chandelier sparkled. The staircase curved up to the second floor like something from a dream. Every room had been restored to its original glory. The ballroom with its parquet floor. The library with its wall of books. The dining room with its massive table that could seat 20. The bedrooms, each one unique, each one beautiful. Your mother would love it, Brenda said, coming to stand beside Sophie. I hope so. Sophie's voice was thick. I wish she could see it. She can, I'm sure of it. Elijah appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something I want to show you, Sophie. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom. It had been her mother's room, and Sophie had saved it for last, wanting to get it perfect. Now, as she walked in, she gasped. Elijah had installed a window seat overlooking the ocean. The same kind her mother had always wanted, but never installed. The cushion was covered in her mother's favorite fabric, soft blue with white flowers. "Elijah," Sophie whispered, "when did you—" "Over the past week, while you were working on the other rooms. I remembered you mentioning your mother wanted one. Thought it would be a nice surprise." Sophie sat on the window seat, running her hands over the smooth wood. She looked out at the ocean, at the waves catching the last light of day. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for this house, for teaching me, for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." Elijah sat beside her. "You deserve it. You've always deserved it. You just didn't know it yet." They sat together, watching the sun set over the water. "I'm scared," Sophie admitted. "What if no one comes tomorrow? What if this all fails?" "Then we'll figure it out, together." He took her hand. "But I don't think it's going to fail. This place has your mother's heart in it, and yours, and mine. That kind of love doesn't fail." The next morning, Sophie woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in a simple navy dress, professional but not stuffy. She did her makeup lightly and pulled her hair back in a neat bun. When she came downstairs, Elijah was already there, wearing a suit. She'd never seen him in anything but work clothes, and the sight of him dressed up made her heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said. "You look pretty good yourself." Brenda was in the kitchen, directing a small catering team. She'd insisted on preparing all the food herself, using Catherine's old recipes. By 10 o'clock, when the doors were supposed to open, Sophie's stomach was in knots. What if her father had been right? What if this was all a fantasy? Then the first car pulled up. Then another. Then another. By 10:30, the entry hall was full of people. The mayor was there, giving a speech about historical preservation. The newspaper sent a reporter and photographer. People from towns Sophie had never met came to congratulate her. And then, right at 11, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Harrison Vance. Sophie's heart sank. But then she saw who was with him. Her mother's sister, Aunt Marie, and her cousin James, and several of her mother's old friends, women Sophie remembered from childhood summers. Harrison stayed in the car, but he'd brought them. Even after everything, he'd brought her mother's family to see this. Aunt Marie swept Sophie into a hug. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "So incredibly proud." The day became a blur. Sophie gave tours of the house, explaining the restoration process. Elijah stood beside her, filling in technical details, his hand occasionally finding hers when he thought no one was looking. People loved it. They booked rooms for the summer. They asked about weddings and events. They told Sophie that the town had needed this, a piece of its history brought back to life. As the sun began to set and the last guests started to leave, Sophie found herself on the grand staircase. The same staircase where a piece of crown molding had fallen on her first day. The same staircase she and Elijah had restored together, piece by piece. She looked out over the entry hall, at Brenda chatting with the caterers, at Aunt Marie examining the chandelier, at Elijah talking to a couple who wanted to book an anniversary stay. This was real. She'd built this, not with her father's money or her family's name, with her own 2 hands and the help of people who believed in her. Elijah noticed her on the stairs and excused himself from the conversation. He climbed up to meet her. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm good, really good." She leaned against him. "Thank you for all of this." "You keep thanking me. This was your dream." "It was my mother's dream, but you helped me make it real." She looked up at him. "And now I have a new dream." "What's that?" "A life with you, building things, fixing things, Growing old in this house and teaching our kids how to use a hammer. Elijah's eyes widened. Our kids? Sophie blushed. I mean, eventually, if you want. I'm getting ahead of myself. He kissed her, right there on the grand staircase, in front of everyone. When they broke apart, the remaining guests were applauding. Sophie laughed, her face bright red. Elijah just grinned. I want that too, he said quietly. All of it, with you. That evening, after everyone had left, Sophie and Elijah stood on the porch watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark water. Brenda came out and handed them each a glass of wine. Your mother and I used to stand here every night, she said. Rain or shine. She'd say this view was worth every penny she put into this old house. She was right, Sophie said. They stood in comfortable silence, the three of them together. Sophie thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Shallow, cruel, desperate for approval from people who didn't matter. That woman had said she'd rather die than date a black man. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew the value of hard work and honest love. Someone who had learned that worth wasn't measured in bank accounts or social standing, but in the courage to change and the strength to build something real. She looked at Elijah. At this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her through her journey to something better. Remember what I said that day? She asked quietly. At the cafe? I remember. I want to say something new. She took his hand. I'd rather die than lose you. Elijah smiled and pulled her close. Good thing you'll never have to. They kissed as the lighthouse beam swept over them, painting them in gold. Inside the house, lights glowed in every window. The manor was alive again, full of love and hope and second chances. And somewhere, Sophie was certain, her mother was smiling. 3 years later, Sophie stood in the ballroom adjusting her white dress in the mirror. Aunt Marie was fussing with the veil while Brenda looked on with misty eyes. You look just like your mother did on her wedding day, Aunt Marie said. Beautiful. Through the window, Sophie could see guests arriving. The whole town had come. Friends, neighbors, even some of her mother's old friends from Boston. And in the front row, sitting alone but looking oddly proud, was Harrison Vance. They'd reconciled slowly over the years. He'd never apologized for what he'd said, but he'd shown up. To the Manor's 1-year anniversary, to Christmas dinner, to Sophie and Elijah's housewarming when they'd bought the cottage next door. He'd even offered to walk her down the aisle today. Sophie had politely declined. She was walking herself. She'd learned to stand on her own 2 feet. There was a knock at the door. Elijah's voice came through. I know I'm not supposed to see you, but I have something for you. Sophie opened the door a crack. Elijah was in his suit, looking nervous and handsome. He held out a small wooden box. What's this? Open it. Inside was a simple gold necklace with a small pendant. The pendant was carved wood, shaped like a tiny house. I made it from one of the floorboards we replaced on that first day, Elijah said. The day you almost quit. I kept a piece, thought maybe someday. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. It's perfect. He helped her put it on. Then, breaking all the rules, he kissed her. I love you, he said. I loved you when you were covered in sawdust and complaining about blisters. I loved you when you stood up to your father. I love you now. And I'll love you when we're old and gray and still fixing up this house. We're never going to be done fixing it up, are we? Not a chance. He grinned. Old houses are like people. There's always something that needs work. But that's what makes them beautiful. Music started playing downstairs, their cue. Elijah kissed her hand and went to take his place. Sophie stood at the top of the grand staircase, the same staircase she'd helped restore, and looked down at the gathering of people who'd become her family. Then she walked down to marry the man who'd taught her that love wasn't about status or money or approval. It was about building something together, about seeing beauty in broken things and having the courage to fix them, about second chances and dirty hands and hearts that were brave enough to change. Sophie Vance had once said she'd rather die than date a black man. Now, as she stood at the altar and looked into Elijah Moore's eyes, she knew the truth. She'd rather die than live without him. And that made all the difference. The end.